While you were lost in the ordinary rhythm of daily life, sleepwalking through the week, a tremor prophesied 3 millennia ago began to fracture the bedrock of 3 great landmasses. The masses drift through a spiritual haze, utterly blind to the reality that the cosmic timepiece has finally tolled its long-awaited hour. Do not look upon December 2026 as merely another calendar shift. Perceive it for what it truly is, a rupture in the fabric of time itself. This is a stellar alignment, a divine signal ignored by the academies and hushed by the clergy, signaling the monumental transfer of power decreed in Psalm 68 verse 31, a sovereign force asking no permission from kings or presidents. The great gears of destiny are already grinding into motion, and I am compelled to address your spirit with unvarnished truth. Shrouded within the fog of imperial conquest, lineages were erased, histories rewritten, and holy scriptures deliberately distorted to eclipse the true identity of a chosen people. These systematic erasures were engineered to induce a deep collective forgetfulness, ensuring you would never gaze into the mirrors of antiquity to find your face, nor utter the prayers of your ancestors. However, there remained a singular, volatile element that the grand architects of this deception failed to account for. The promises of the Creator cannot be extinguished by the shovel of mortal men. Prophecy advances to the thundering rhythm of heaven, ignoring the fragile whims of humanity. Even as we speak, in this pivotal month of December 2026, the ancient texts are gasping for breath and coming alive, while talking heads on the news reduce these miracles to mere political chess moves. While economists chatter about market instability and religious leaders maintain a deafening silence, you are standing on the sheer edge of an unveiling that will forever shatter your understanding of the sacred word. You are moments away from realizing exactly why certain passages were swiftly bypassed during your childhood Sunday schooling. Get ready to stitch together the torn edges of scrolls aged thousands of years with the headlines of this very morning, creating a tapestry so shocking it will snatch the very air from your lungs. By the time we conclude this sacred journey, the eyes with which you survey the nations will be fundamentally transformed. Banish all notions of fringe theories. We have arrived at the intersection where cold, hard documentation kisses biblical fate. We are dealing with irrefutable metrics from the year 2026, where reports from the World Economic Forum highlight the surging gross domestic product of Africa rising to 3.8% in 2026, coinciding with tectonic realignments within the BRICS summits and thunderous proclamations from the African Union. We shall stack the evidence like a mason constructing a fortress. Theological analysis, archaeological certainties, dated chronicles, and the undeniable phenomena of the past 90 days. When the final stone is set, the resulting image will blaze with such intensity that you will wonder how a truth of this magnitude sat unseen before your eyes for your entire life. Behold the cartography of the spiritual landscape we must traverse in this visual unveiling. First, we examine the primordial verses that charted this exact transfer of global authority, words so potent they once made Caesars and emperors shake with dread. Second, we identify 5 undeniable signs manifesting in 2026 that synchronize with the Creator's timeline with haunting precision. Third, we trace the historical pulse that proves power always changes hands when a sleeping giant awakens to claim their covenant inheritance. And finally, the fourth element, the holy role you are destined to enact in this unfolding era. Your arrival here is no digital coincidence. We are following a blood-red line stretching from the dunes of Egypt through the horrors of the transatlantic voyage, surviving the fires of the civil rights struggle and culminating in the majestic expansion of BRICS, which has recently flung its gates open to Ethiopia and Egypt. When you witness these shards interlocking, when you grasp the heavy spiritual significance of African states forging the planet's most formidable economic bond, and when you accept that this is unspooling within the fleeting span of your own existence, it will vibrate through the very marrow of your bones. This goes far beyond mere academic learning. This is a summons to total transformation, for you are not simply reviewing history. You are becoming conscious of your precise location within the divine's everlasting story. Whether you reside in Atlanta or Lagos, London or Port-au-Prince, whether you are a displaced child of the diaspora or a spirit famished for truth, this tidal wave of prophecy is crashing over you. For when the Almighty moves to recalibrate the scales of justice, when archaic words sprint toward their fulfillment, every soul on this terraqueous globe feels the vibration. Permit me to offer a reality that may weigh heavily upon your soul, yet silence is no longer an option. The hush from the altars regarding this revelation exists because it imperils 4 centuries of comfortable, manufactured doctrine. It is missing from seminary syllabi because it would compel religious institutions to admit they have spotlighted certain verses while deliberately keeping others in the dark. If your heart begins to hammer against your ribs, understand that this is the visceral response to standing in the presence of unadulterated truth. Truth is the supreme alarm clock. It insists that you question your legacy, and ultimately it holds the only key to your emancipation. Yet, before it heals, it must disrupt your tranquility. Stay alert and grounded, for what comes next is the foundation upon which all reality rests. We are preparing to unfurl the ancient parchments together. However, we shall read them stripped of the spectacles of tradition, returning instead to the primal potency of the original Hebrew tongue. We will examine the context with a microscope and dare to pose the inquiry that causes religious custodians to shudder. Whose hand held the quill that determined which mysteries were proclaimed and which were interred in silence? Let us commence with Psalm 68, verse 31. It is probable you have never endured a sermon on this specific text, and the motives for that omission will shortly become transparent. But first, let the decree reverberate. Princes shall come out of Egypt. Ethiopia shall soon stretch out her hands unto God. To the casual eye, it appears as simple poetry, but let us halt and stare deeply into the furnace of what is actually being prophesied. This hallowed psalm was carved into the eternal archives of human history approximately 1,000 years before Christ, a voice thundering across a vast abyss of 3,000 years to reach us now. It stands as a celestial premonition, a divine blueprint marking a specific coordinate in destiny when the great nations of Africa, specifically Egypt and Ethiopia, the twin pillars of the continent, would rush toward the Creator with a breathless, overwhelming urgency. However, there lies a profound spiritual weight within these words that often evaporates, stripped of its glory, when the ancient text is flattened into the simplicity of modern English translation. The ancient Hebrew root, often translated merely as soon, is the vibrant, kinetic term times mahar asterisk, which deep scholarly excavation reveals as meaning something urgent, hasty, or precipitous. It does not suggest eventually or in due season. It signifies the physical intensity of hands darting forward, a body propelled by urgent speed, a spirit charging ahead with a singular, consuming fire that refuses to be extinguished or denied. This is no passive observation suggesting that perhaps, in some distant future, Africa might embrace religion. This is a seismic prophecy declaring that a season would arrive when African nations would urgently, rapidly, and purposefully stretch their very souls toward the infinite. And when you immerse yourself in the majestic narrative of Psalm 68, you discover it is ringed by verses of cosmic warfare, the Almighty arising from his throne, enemies vanishing like mist before the wind, and great kingdoms, surrendering their tribute as power, is divinely redistributed across the globe. We are beholding the vernacular of heavenly royalty, the lexicon of a divine transfer of authority that transcends human understanding. This is the caliber of prophecy that foretells a tectonic shift in the spiritual and political atmosphere of the world. And now, I invite you to contemplate this enigma with profound reverence. When was the last time you heard the pulpit tremble under the weight of this specific verse? When was this revelation ever emblazoned in neon on a church sign or served as the pulsating heartbeat of a theological conference? Why does it appear that certain prophecies are shouted from the highest mountain peaks, while others are relegated to the shadows, treated as if they were written in invisible ink upon the sacred page? Yet, that is merely a solitary strand in the magnificent tapestry. Allow me to unveil the grand design, for this intricate pattern is woven seamlessly throughout the Genesis and Revelation of Scripture. Shift your spiritual gaze to the 46th chapter of Jeremiah, where the entire passage concerns the fate of Egypt, but focus your inner eye specifically on verses 25 and 26. The Creator is pronouncing a divine verdict, a necessary purification by fire, yet observe the startling miracle that follows immediately after. He declares that Egypt will indeed face chastisement. But then, in verse 26, the dawn breaks the darkness. He promises that afterward Egypt shall be inhabited, as in the days of antiquity, speaking the undeniable language of resurrection and renewal. This is prophecy declaring that a destined epoch approaches when Egypt shall return to her former majesty and ancient strength. For Jeremiah was not speaking of these lands in a historical void. In Jeremiah chapter 38, verse 7, when the prophet himself was cast into the mud of the cistern of despair, who was the vessel chosen for his deliverance? It was Ebed-melech, a man of Ethiopia, a royal official in the king's court, and the Almighty delivered a specific promise to this Ethiopian hero, guaranteeing him safety and divine shielding. And for what reason? Because he placed his unwavering trust in the Most High and acted with the boldness of a lion when the very leaders of Judah were paralyzed by the grip of fear. This is the sacred rhythm the Bible reveals, yet it is a truth often conveniently omitted from the simplified lessons of our childhood Sunday schools. African nations and individuals are consistently portrayed as beacons of moral fortitude, militarily formidable, spiritually resonant, and strategically positioned in prophecy for a future restoration of global influence. Let us take a pilgrimage to the 18th chapter of Isaiah, where the entire vision focuses intently on Cush, the ancient dominion comprising Ethiopia and Sudan. Verse 2 depicts a people of majestic stature, smooth-skinned and tall, a nation viewed with reverence and awe far and wide for their might. This is the absolute antithesis of weakness. This is not a portrait of inferiority. This is the Holy Scripture itself, bowing in solemn acknowledgement of African strength, sovereignty, and undeniable might. And then, verse 7 unveils the mystery. In the appointed season of the Lord of hosts, these very people will bear tribute to Mount Zion. That is a prophecy reserved for the eschatological climax, describing a holy moment when African nations arrive as equals, as dignitaries of the earth, bringing tribute not as captives, but as royal ambassadors of the King. Consider one final revelation before we proceed further. Zephaniah chapter 3, verse 10. From beyond the rivers of Cush, my worshippers, my scattered ones, shall bring me offerings. Once again, Cush stands as Ethiopia and the deep, beating heart of the African interior. Once again, the prophetic compass points unerringly toward a future horizon. And once again, it is inextricably linked to worship, to a covenant bond, to a people identified by God as my people, bringing offerings in an act of supreme devotion and power. Do you perceive the mosaic coming into focus? These are not scattered crumbs. This is a consistent, golden thread of prophecy woven through the very fabric of the Old Testament. Africa is not presented as a mere footnote in the annals of sacred history. Her people are not painted as cursed or diminished. They are revealed as powerful, as God-fearing, as integral members of the covenant, holding a specific, ordained role in the prophecies of the end of days. Scholars have catalogued over 1,000 biblical references to Africa, with Egypt alone mentioned 740 times, and Cush, Ethiopia, repeatedly portrayed as the symbol of unshakable strength and resilient faith. So why has this profound knowledge been withheld from you? Why is this missing from the standard curriculum of the faithful? Hold that question close, for we shall return to answer it. But first, you must open your eyes to the unfolding reality of the year 2026, which renders these ancient scrolls suddenly vibrant, alive, and critically urgent. Sign number 1. The shifting of economics and global power. In the year 2024, the alliance known as BRICS expanded. Do you truly understand the significance of this coalition? It is an economic fortress that began with the Titans: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. It was already a formidable force, already challenging the financial hegemony of the West. But in the previous years, they threw open their gates to the world. And consider which two nations stepped through the threshold. Egypt and Ethiopia, the exact two nations named in the prophecy of Psalm 68, verse 31. Let that truth resonate deep within your spirit. 3,000 years ago, a psalm was sung, declaring that princes would emerge from Egypt, and Ethiopia would stretch out her hands to God. And in the years 2024 through 2026, these very nations have joined the most significant alliance, challenging the Western monopoly on global destiny. By the year 2026, this alliance has grown to 11 sovereign members. Even the vast archipelago of Indonesia has heeded the call, swelling our ranks to encompass half the living souls on this terra firma, rising as a titan to challenge the ancient leviathans of the global financial hierarchy. This great gathering summons us to look deep into the mirror of ancient prophecy. The BRICS alliance is constructing a new arc for global trade, one that sails freely upon the high seas, unbound by the chains of the American dollar's long dominion. They are raising independent altars of prosperity, systems of exchange that exist entirely outside the high walls and iron vaults of Western banking supremacy. Fresh treaties are being etched into stone, severing the rotting tendrils of colonial control that have choked the land for too long. Do not dismiss this as a mirage. This is the tangible ink of destiny drying upon the scrolls of our time. Witness the second great omen. The rising sun of the African Continental Free Trade Area, proclaimed to the nations as AFCFTA. This colossal machine has drawn breath, roaring into a state of full and terrifying wakefulness. Can the human mind truly comprehend the scale of this metamorphosis? 54 distinct realms, once fragmented, are now weaving their destinies into a single, impenetrable fabric of commerce. It is ordained to conceive an economic power exceeding $3 trillion, ascending as one of the most formidable sanctuaries of wealth upon the face of the entire earth. The oracles within the World Bank envision a horizon where this union pours $450 billion into Africa's treasury by the year 2035, embracing a brotherhood of 1.44 billion spirits. By the year 2026, 48 of the 55 sovereign kingdoms have already set their royal seals upon this sacred agreement. Territories once carved up by the cruel knives of imperialists, lands that wept blood for decades in wars fueled by unseen, distant shadows, now join palms to erect a citadel of economic sovereignty. And herein lies the profound spiritual vibration, the rhythmic thrum of prophecy beating within the chest of this very hour. Unity was the ancient key lost in the shifting sands. As the Messiah declared, "A house fractured against its own foundations cannot stand." Today, the chieftains of Africa chant strategic autonomy as their holy invocation. It marks a celestial turning point where we rise as a singular monolith rather than crumbled rubble. It declares that the laws of our engagement are now scripted by our own quills. It signifies that the age of serving as mere pawns on a foreign chessboard has reached its twilight. In the Holy Scrolls, this is earth-shaking, for the prophecy is clear regarding the assembly of the multitude before the glory of restoration is unveiled. The voice of the Eternal proclaims, "I shall gather them together, and only then shall I make them whole." The fusion of spirit and flesh must always foreshadow the transference of true dominion. We cast our gaze now toward the third omen, the awakening of the earth's buried wealth and the tilting of the scales of influence. Deep within the womb of Africa sleeps the lion's share of the world's treasure, cobalt, to breathe life into the batteries, lithium to propel the chariots of tomorrow, and rare earth elements that spark the mind of advanced technology. The very spirit of the Green Revolution dwells here. The fate of our technological horizon hangs by a thread, tethered entirely to the riches slumbering beneath the African dust. Africa stands sentinel over nearly 30% of the globe's critical mineral stores. Even in this year of 2026, the Democratic Republic of Congo alone bestows upon the world 70% of its cobalt. For ages, these jewels were ripped from the soil, while the nations that birthed them were fed nothing but dust and crumbs in exchange for their gold. Yet, the cosmic winds are turning. The old decrees are burning to ash, and fresh covenants are being hammered out on the anvil of justice. The laws of the harvest are being rewritten, witnessed in Malawi's proclamation in 2026 to forbid the export of raw earth, demanding that value be forged within her own borders. Nature dictates. He who holds the resources clutches the scepter of power. As the ancient texts predict, princes shall come out of Egypt. Grasp this truth. Royalty does not beg for leftovers, nor does it drape itself in the tattered rags of victimhood. Princes are the architects of authority, lords of the land's bounty, speaking with a voice of thunder and unshakable might. Now, witness the fourth sign, destiny inscribed in the bloodlines. Africa cradles the youngest pulse on the planet, while the lands of Europe, North America, Japan, and even China grow grey and weary, their nurseries gathering dust as birth rates plummet below the line of survival. Their strength fades like grass in winter. Yet, Africa blooms with a median age of merely 19 winters. It is a continent vibrating with the raw energy of youth, a legion poised to build, to invent, to dream, and to propel the earth forward. With a host numbering 1.55 billion souls, multiplying at a pace of 2.29% annually as of 2026, more than 60% walk the earth with fewer than 25 years to their names. This rising human tide holds a potential as deep and vast as the abyss. We must recall that prophecy does not weave its pattern in mere days, but stretches across the long, bending arc of generations. The hands that raise the walls of the kingdom are seldom the same hands that chafed under the iron shackles of exile. In this sacred instant, a fresh lineage rises from the African savannas and the far-flung corners of the diaspora. These are the children who never bent the knee to the yoke of empire, who are not bound by the chains of a vanquished soul. Fed by the rivers of knowledge and plugged into the global heartbeat, they step into their divine inheritance with a boldness that causes the very ground to tremble. This is the distilled essence of prophetic timing. And now the fifth seal is broken, a profound resurrection of culture and spirit. The atmosphere itself is transforming, a frequency you can feel rattling your bones if you but quiet the chaos and listen. A famine for the ancient ways has begun, a desperate thirst to uncover African history, to reclaim biblical lineage, and to recall who we were before the shadow of the slave ships and the colonizer eclipsed the sun. Tongues are twisting to relearn the speech of the fathers. Seekers track their blood through the double helix and the archives, hunting for their origins. Even within the temples, pulpits are beginning to thunder with truths that were forbidden whispers merely a decade ago. Scribes are revealing scrolls that shatter the fragile glass of old deceits. Be not mistaken, this symphony is not conducted by mortal hands. This is the Ruach, the breath of the Almighty, sweeping across hearts and minds, unveiling the hidden mysteries at the exact, divinely appointed Kairos moment. All 5 of these celestial beacons are blazing before our vision in this very hour. We do not await a distant dream, nor a hopeful tomorrow. The time is upon us. It is December 2026. As these words pierce your spirit, the widening circle of bricks has embraced the ancient sands of Egypt and the highlands of Ethiopia. The African Continental Free Trade Area is living and respirating. The tables where the Earth's bounty is divided are turning, tilting the very axis of global dominion. A generation of youth ascends to its throne, while a spiritual and cultural awakening sweeps across the terrain like a sanctified wildfire. Every single thread of this grand design aligns flawlessly with the biblical prophecies of restitution, of the great assembly, of the transfer of crowns, and of the hour when Ethiopia shall swiftly stretch out her hands unto the divine. Yet, before you presume this saga belongs to a single tribe or tongue, permit me to speak with crystalline clarity. The oracles of Scripture are never crafted to elevate one people merely to watch another grind their faces in the dust. That is not the character of the divine architect. Recall when Joseph was raised to the high seat in Egypt. The harvest was not ruin, but redemption. Nations were snatched from the jaws of famine. When the scions of the primordial earth finally ascend to reclaim their celestial birthright within the holy manuscripts, the radiance of that awakening floods the terrestrial sphere. It is the inevitable manifestation of divine balance, a cosmic recalibration that births a peace as solid and immovable as the mountains themselves. We are speaking of a profound rectification of the universal scales, a mending of the spiritual fractures that have tormented the human condition for eons. It is nothing less than the resurrection of the grand architect's original design, and when that astral geometry clicks back into place, every living soul finds the fertile ground necessary to bloom. However, to fully comprehend this returning glory, we must now descend further into the labyrinth of mystery and seize the next crucial revelation with both hands. If these glorious destinies were truly chiseled into the bedrock of the stars, if this grand tapestry was woven into the eternal scroll before time began, why did the great silence endure for ages? Why did a dark night of 400 years, filled with chains, subjugation, and the long shadow of empire, fall so heavily upon the land? Why was this esoteric wisdom cast into the deep, lightless abyss of forgotten lore? Whose fingers turned the iron keys that locked these prophecies away, hiding them from the yearning hearts and searching minds of the faithful for so many generations? To journey down this road is to walk across burning coals, yet our sacred charge is not to seek the comforting slumber of ignorance. We stand here to stare without blinking into the searing, blinding brilliance of the absolute truth. The undeniable reality unveils a malevolent cadence within the chronicles of history, a deliberate, methodical suppression by earthly powers, desperate to bury any ancient wisdom that threatened their fragile dominion. Do not dismiss this as the fevered whisperings of paranoia. This is the cold, unyielding granite of historical fact, inscribed with verified dates, names, royal decrees, and the lingering fingerprints of decisions that still shape our world in 2026. Long before the 16th century broke the horizon, before the galleons of Europe unfurled their sails to pillage and explore, the African continent vibrated with the thunderous heartbeat of majestic empires and sovereign authority. Meditate upon the grandeur of Egypt and the iron will of Kush, which surged northward to seize the crown of the Nile in the year 715 B.C.E., only to be later eclipsed by the rising solar glory of Aksum around 350 CE. Gaze upon the golden radiance of Ghana and Mali, the sovereign domain of Mansa Musa, a monarch whose treasury remains unmatched in the collective memory of man, commanding an adjusted fortune exceeding $400 billion. Turn your eyes toward Songhai, the titan of the 15th and 16th centuries, the most magnificent empire to ever grace the African soil. These were no simple, primitive wanderers scratching out a living in the dust. On the contrary, they were the zenith of human potential, intricate civilizations overflowing with unimaginable opulence, deep philosophical scholarship, sky-piercing architecture, vast networks of trade, and a military might that made the ground tremble. The great library of Alexandria stood as the lighthouse of the ancient world, the very nexus where the intellect of the human race gathered to pulse, expand, and breathe. While Europe stumbled blindly through the fog of the Dark Ages, Timbuktu in Mali blazed with the illumination of universities. Likewise, the archers of Kush in what is now Sudan shattered the iron legions of Rome time and time again. These truths are chiseled into the very foundation of reality. Yet, how many of these stories were ever whispered in the halls of your education? Now, let us pivot our gaze to the spiritual core of this narrative. The Holy Writ never once cast the dim shadow of primitive upon the lands of Africa, nor did the sacred scrolls ever depict her children as lesser souls in the majestic gaze of the divine. Moses himself was nursed on the profound esoteric wisdom of Egypt, and he chose an African woman as his bride. Recall the Ethiopian eunuch in Acts chapter 8, the trusted guardian of the queen's entire vault of riches. Such a position speaks of a staggering level of authority, a station that demanded absolute, unshakable integrity and commanded supreme influence over the kingdom. When the Queen of Sheba made her pilgrimage to Solomon, her caravan carried such an overwhelming abundance of gold and spices that the scriptures testify no wealth like it had ever been beheld before, nor has it been seen since. Even in the hour of the ultimate sacrifice, it was Simon of Cyrene, a son of North Africa, who was chosen to shoulder the crushing weight of the timber for the Savior. His lineage, Alexander and Rufus, are immortalized in Mark chapter 15, standing as eternal testaments that they were pillars and renowned spirits within the blossoming garden of the early church. From the opening lines of Genesis to the final trumpet of Revelation, the African presence is woven into the divine narrative not as a mere footnote, but as a central, golden thread in the tapestry. So, what cataclysmic event severed this truth from our collective consciousness? How did we travel the dark road from that glorious reality to a waking nightmare, where millions were shackled, entire civilizations were erased, sacred identities were stolen, and the prophecies of renewal were buried deep beneath the earth? The turning of the cosmic tide began in the 16th century with the onset of the transatlantic slave trade, a commerce built on the currency of human sorrow. Yet, before a single wooden hull could cut through the Atlantic waves, a venomous narrative had to be spun in the minds of men to justify the unjustifiable. For one cannot chain millions of souls fashioned in the Creator's own image without first deceiving oneself and the world that these beings are less than human, marked by a curse and deserving of their tragic fate. Thus, twisted interpretations were forged in the fires of avarice and deceit to serve a wicked master. These lies were draped in holy vestments to appear righteous, warping the account of Noah and his sons in Genesis chapter 9 until the story bore no resemblance to the truth. While it is written that Ham witnessed his father's vulnerability and consequences followed, the distortion lies entirely in what was added by the wicked hands of men. Scour the text with a fine-toothed comb, for nowhere in Genesis chapter 9 does the Almighty decree that the lineage of Ham is doomed to perpetual servitude. There is no verse that names melanin as a mark of shame, nor any line that binds this ancient family drama specifically to the people of the African continent. That toxic theology was conjured centuries later to validate the invalid, a fabrication now thoroughly dismantled by scholars who confirm that no such malediction exists within the Holy Canon. It was a complete fabrication, born after the year 1500, a spiritual weapon forged solely to prop up the brutal institution of human bondage. Tragically, the deception took deep root. Pulpiteers proclaimed it from the heights, educators instilled it in the youth, and whole generations matured under the delusion that these chains were divinely ordained. This was psychological warfare masquerading as theology, and its poison spread far beyond the hearts of individual believers. This falsehood was hardened into the very statutes and iron laws of the nations, becoming the mortar of a broken society. In the Americas and the colonial territories, specific decrees made it a punishable crime for the enslaved to acquire the power of literacy. We must ask the question, why? The fear was palpable and trembling. If their eyes were opened to the written word, they might gaze upon the scriptures for themselves and see the truth. They might uncover the explosive reality that the Holy Book sings of freedom, demands justice, and reveals a God who leans down from the heavens to hear the groans of the oppressed and brings deliverance. They might turn to the book of Exodus and see their own reflection in the plight of Israel, realizing the divine stands firmly with the shackled, never with the one holding the whip. Therefore, the oppressor's remedy was brutal but simple. Outlaw the deciphering of words and forbid any gathering for worship that was not strictly watched by the master's eye. They criminalized the mother tongues of Africa, systematically stripping away every vestige of identity, culture, history, and the sacred tether that bound them to their ancestry. The dark hope was that, as the wheel of generations turned, a people would suffer a collective amnesia, knowing nothing but the lies whispered to them in the dark. Yet, a fatal flaw remained in their wicked design. For while you may strip a man of his name and cut out his tongue, the spirit remembers what the mind has been forced to forget. Mortal hands may strive to wipe the ink of history from the annals of time, yet they remain utterly impotent to erase a single syllable carved into the granite tablets of the eternal word. There is no power under the firmament strong enough to hush the Creator's whisper to the human spirit. Nor can any earthly king pause the turning of the celestial gears when the moment of destiny chimes its arrival. Cast your spirit back to the 1800s. Though the heavy iron of chattel slavery was legally struck from the ankle, the fortress of subjugation stood firm, merely swapping the whip of the master for the crushing burden of the sharecropper's debt. The spectre of colonialism drifted across lands like a toxic mist to fracture and dominate, while Jim Crow built high fences of segregation and apartheid cemented a towering monolith of racial caste. The labels changed and the mechanisms grew more sophisticated, yet the shadow remained the same. A relentless drive to concentrate dominion in the grip of the elite and to drive sharp stakes of division between the masses. Wisdom was sequestered behind iron gates, and through that long, dark winter, the holy sanctuaries largely held their tongues, or worse, greased the very gears of the machine that crushed the spirit. Still, crying out from the desolate places, there were always the few prophetic torches who dared to scream the perilous truth, paying for their courage with their very lifeblood. But the grand basilicas of power mostly floated downstream, peddling a sedated gospel designed to fluff the pillows of the comfortable and keep the sleeping giant slumbering. They warped the sacred scrolls, straining the divine word through a sieve that caught only what protected their ease and discarded anything that threatened their privilege. They cast a blind eye toward the scriptures thundering for liberation, deliberately burying the ancient prophecies that sang of the majesty and rising destiny of the African peoples. Do not mistake this for an attack on the altar. My spirit creates a harmony of love for the mystical body, yet the call of honor demands we strip the veil from our past and stare into the unvarnished face of history. Intricate architectures of thought were erected to feed specific hungers, with doctrines turned up loud or muted to silence, based solely on whose coffers were being filled with gold. Imagine yourself seated on a gilded throne built upon bones. If a seer approached with a scroll foretelling the ruin of your kingdom, would you open the gates for that message to fly? Or would you rush to snuff out the flame and pray the smoke dissipates unseen? This is not the machination of a villain, but the fragile, desperate instinct of the human ego clinging to survival. The ultimate defense for the fortress of authority is to seize the quill and become the sole author of the story. You decide which legends are chanted in the square and which rot in the cellar. But there is one force that mocks human decrees: time. Prophecy marches to the pulse of the divine, ignoring the calendars of kings. We are currently balancing on the edge of a magnificent awakening, a new epoch where secrets buried deep are being clawed up into the piercing brilliance of the sun. Realities long interred are breaking the soil. Silenced voices are roaring like thunder, and the ancient visions that once made empires tremble are now manifesting with an irresistible gravity. Walk with me through the mists of time, to the 1960s, that storm-tossed decade when the cosmic wheels began to whirl with a terrifying and wonderful speed. In the span of just 1960, 17 African territories snapped the chains of foreign rule, 17 sovereign crowns emerging from the dust in a single revolution of the earth. This was no sluggish evolutionary creep. It was a bolt of divine lightning, a sudden acceleration of the prophetic timeline. From 1945 to 1975, the cartography of Africa was radically transfigured. While across the ocean, the American spirit was being hammered and reshaped on the anvil of the civil rights crusade. We must comprehend the spiritual anchor of this rebellion. It was guided by the sanctuary, by black shepherds and their flocks, who carried the lantern of belief out from the pews and onto the pavement. They mended the severed connection between piety and justice, reading the Exodus not as a fable of antiquity, but as a breathing battle plan for their immediate liberation. Their throats released anthems of liberty grounded in scripture, and Dr. King stood as the watchman, declaring that the colossal arc of the cosmos leans heavily toward the light of righteousness. This was far more than a reverie. It was a sharp, prophetic gaze piercing through the heavy veil of the physical realm. Here walked a spirit who understood that the divine clock mandates balance, a universal inversion, where the downtrodden rise to the peak. And though Dr. King was summoned home before the harvest was fully gathered, the procession did not falter, for a fire ignited by eternal truth cannot be snuffed out by the silencing of one man. That generation did more than tap on the gate. They shattered the ancient seal that held back the deluge. They cracked the monolithic falsehood that the current order was everlasting, revealing the brittleness of stones laid with the mortar of cruelty. They forced a kingdom to its knees to confess that segregation was rot, that prejudice was iniquity, and that waiting for justice is denying it. Yet, the triumph was not yet total. We are painfully aware that a signature on parchment does not instantly soften the granite of the human heart, but it was a hairline fracture in the levee, a vital wound to the old way. And once the wall is pierced, the river begins to roar, the volume expanding with every passing hour until the whole structure crumbles under the relentless pressure of reality. The era spanning the 1970s, 80s, and 90s beheld the flowering of black dignity, the ascent of Afrocentric knowing, and a splendid rebirth of culture. Spirits began to cloak themselves in the raiment of their forebears, weaving the vibrant tapestries of African legacy into their very being. They reclaimed the tongues of the motherland and questioned who they were. In the same breath, African states labored to construct their future, though the path was often paved with thorns. Darkness loomed in the guise of tyrants, and decay conflicts stoked by invisible hands across the sea who profited from keeping the continent in pieces. But even in the storm, the towers of learning ascended, markets began to beat with a steady rhythm, and a fresh lineage drank deeply from the cisterns of understanding. Then came the digital sunrise, the age of the web, signaling a shift in the tides. In this new epoch, the sentinels at the gate lost the power to dam the river of truth. Suddenly, a youth in the quiet backwoods of Mississippi could pick the locks of history to reveal the majesty of ancient African empires. A student in Lagos could extend a hand across the electronic void and seize the academic scrolls sequestered in the marble halls of Europe. A matriarch in London could track her bloodline to the very dust of a specific African village. The jailers dropped their keys, and the people began to excavate their stolen heritage. They uncovered scholarly texts detailing the African footprint in the Holy Scripture, volumes written long ago but exiled from the pulpits of the mainstream. They began to brush the dirt from archaeological witnesses that the ancient, dusty sermons, murmured in the ivory towers, are turning to ash, unable to withstand the blinding light of the truths now manifesting before our mortal gaze. The foundations of their supposed wisdom are cracking under the weight of a new reality. Across the vast, invisible currents of the digital realm, souls are colliding and igniting sacred flames of curiosity, casting aside the sweetened poison of convenient falsehoods to embrace the terrifying beauty of truth. This is the 11th hour, the very moment of their spiritual resurrection. Behold the ascent of a chosen bloodline, a people who refuse to sip from the cup of amnesia. This is a generation destined to shatter the heavy silence and incinerate the fabricated chronicles handed down by those who sought to keep them in chains. This spirit recognizes no earthly boundaries. It beats with a single thunderous heart that pulses in Chicago, reverberates through the streets of Nairobi, echoes across the fog of London, and shakes the ground in Port-au-Prince, all in the same breathless instant. You must not confuse this with the simple machinations of men or political assembly. This is the Ruach, the very breath of the Almighty, sweeping across the nations, stripping away the veil to reveal hidden kingdoms at the exact kairos moment destiny has appointed. Let our minds journey back to the year 2020, for that was the precise second the fabric of our illusion was torn asunder, and the quickening of time itself became an undeniable force pressing upon us all. When the global pestilence brought the turning wheels of commerce to a standstill, it shone a piercing light into the deepest cracks of our world order, rendering the canyon of inequality impossible for even the blindest among us to ignore. The weeping against injustice transmuted into a roar that shook the pillars of the earth, a planetary anthem rising from the dust and ashes to demand a total transfiguration of the covenant between the rulers and the ruled. However, while the lenses of the world focused on the smoke of burning cities and the theater of politics, a seismic spiritual shifting was taking place in the quiet chambers of the heart. Humanity began to put the very nature of existence on trial. They demanded to know, who drafted the blueprints of this labyrinth? Who feasts at the banquet while the multitudes perish? And what does the eternal decree of the Creator actually say regarding justice, dominion, and the unfolding timeline of prophecy? In the midst of this great shaking, the ancient cradle of Africa was silently undergoing a metamorphosis. transforming into a radiant beacon of technological sovereignty that the world had failed to predict. From the red earth of Kenya, financial innovations sprang forth that leaped over the decaying systems of the West, while Nigeria birthed constellations of technology startups that ascended like new stars in the night sky. We witnessed majestic spires of renewable power piercing the heavens, erected without the rusted shackles of foreign aid, while young visionaries constructed empires valued in the billions, forged from nothing but pure grit and divine foresight. The exhausted, crumbling fable that Africa is a desolate land in need of eternal arms began to dissolve into mist, replaced by the concrete reality of the African Continental Free Trade Area, binding the land together in strength. The great eagle of the BRICS alliance spread its massive wings, and the nations of the motherland began to march as a singular, unstoppable monolith through the hallowed corridors of international influence. Strategic autonomy ceased to be a whispered dream and became the codified commandment of the Union. I am not speaking to you of fleeting fantasies or the blindness of optimism. I speak of covenants sealed in ink and blood, of trade agreements visible to the naked eye, and of tectonic diplomatic shifts that are now permanently etched into the grand annals of history. Then arrived the pivotal year of 2024, when the gates of the alliance swung wide to embrace Egypt and Ethiopia, the very lands whispered of in the sacred scroll of Psalm 68, verse 31. The scripture foretells of princes coming forth from Egypt and Ethiopia stretching out her hands unto God, a prophecy carved into the bedrock of time itself. And behold, when they stretched out their hands, it was not in the desperate posture of a beggar seeking crumbs, but in the firm grip of partnership with the titans who hold the pillars of the global economy. Russia, China, India, Brazil, South Africa, Iran, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Egypt, and Ethiopia. This is far more than a mere assembly of flags. This is a sacred confederation cradling the heartbeat of half of humanity and commanding the lion's share of the earth's riches. Do you not perceive the heavy prophetic mantle resting upon such an alignment? For 3,000 years, the ancient words remained a promise, shimmering on the distant horizon. Princes shall come, and Ethiopia shall stretch her hands. But in the years 2024 and 2026, the grammar of history has fundamentally shifted. The princes are arriving, Ethiopia is stretching, and the prophecy is breathing in the eternal now. This is why December 2026 stands as a magnificent threshold in time, a convergence point where the disparate threads of destiny are being woven together by an unseen hand. The economic currents, the political winds, the spiritual depths, and the generational tides are colliding in a grand symphony of revelation. It is akin to witnessing the fragments of a celestial mosaic, scattered for eons, suddenly locking into place with terrifying velocity. This is the violent and beautiful language of birth. It mirrors the sacred pattern the Messiah spoke of in Matthew 24. As the fulfillment draws near, the contractions of history arrive with ever-increasing intensity and speed. We are now compelled to confront a shadow that is uncomfortable to acknowledge, yet absolutely essential for our comprehension of this new era. Who gathers the harvest when the world remains frozen in stagnation? What are the bitter fruits of systems architected to hoard power within the clenched iron fists of the few? As the wise investigators of corruption have always counseled, one must trace the river of gold upstream to discover its true source. Behold the architecture of global finance, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and the supreme, unquestioned reign of the United States dollar in the markets of the earth. These towering cathedrals of commerce were all erected in the smoking aftermath of the Second World War by the victors of the West to cement their dominion. They were engineered with precise, cold intent to serve specific thrones. This is not the murmuring of a conspiracy theorist, but the hard, undeniable text of history itself. When the nations of the South seek capital, they are forced to bow the knee before institutions not born of their soil, institutions that do not hold their prosperity in their hearts, but bind them with heavy, invisible chains. These chains manifest as cruel conditions, mandates on how to govern, demands to surrender rightful resources for foreign extraction, and the coercion to sign treaties that bleed the land dry. This is not the warm embrace of partnership. It is the suffocating stranglehold of economic dominion masquerading as institutional benevolence. Furthermore, you must ask yourself, who sits upon the high thrones of the media conglomerates that sculpt the perception of the masses? Who holds the golden keys to the film studios that determine how the epic saga of Africa is projected onto the silver screens of the globe? Who commands the publishing houses that decide which histories are immortalized in leather-bound volumes and which are buried in the silence of obscure, forgotten journals? Consider the image of the motherland painted by Western storytellers, a landscape of perpetual sorrow, a playground for exotic tourism, or a blood-soaked theater of war. Rarely is it unveiled as a cradle of ancient genius, a powerhouse of modern industry, or a home where souls navigate complex existences filled with burning ambition and triumph. This gross distortion of reality is not a mere slip of the pen. It is a calculated, sinister design. It sustains a powerful psychological spell, where some are cast as eternal benefactors and others as eternal dependents. A fog that blinds the world to the prophetic shift occurring right before our eyes. Who governs the mind through the halls of education? Observe closely what is elevated as universal history versus what is sidelined into the dusty corners of elective study. The ironclad legions of Rome are gifted an eternity of scholarly worship, a sprawling temporal dominion where their martial laws and conquests are sung by the choir of history without pause or interruption. Yet Kemet, the very genesis point where humanity first inhaled the breath of the cosmos, is suffocated into a fleeting moment, severed from its black motherland as though it were an alien entity. The golden majesty of Mali and Mansa Musa, the singular entity of supreme opulence to ever tread upon this soil, are banished to the ghostly edges of a page, a mere phantom in the archives, if the texts deign to reveal them at all. The hallowed halls of Timbuktu's ancient wisdom are diminished to a mere whisper in the margins of the great chronicle. But heed this warning. This great silencing is no accident of forgetfulness, nor a byproduct of time. It is a calculated erasure, for to unveil these ancient monoliths of intellect would necessitate a terrifying restructuring of reality, a revelation of who truly grasped the scepter of dominion, who unlocked the celestial gates of gnosis, and who directed the rivers of gold in the elder days. Even the sanctuaries of the holy, the very altars of faith, have been woven into this dark tapestry of supreme control. Gaze upon the faces that constitute the high councils of the denominations. Observe who ascends the pulpit to decree truth, and whose cultural lens is canonized as the immutable law of the divine. For eons, the sacred art of deciphering the Creator's voice has been held hostage by those who feast upon the harvest of the current order. This is the primal instinct of the Leviathan. Every system is engineered to fortify its own survival against the tides of change. They clench their dominion by sequestering the earth's blessings, by distilling the waters of truth until they are diluted, and by decreeing which prophets may speak and which inquiries are forbidden to cross the lips of the faithful. And when the visionaries arise to declare that the scrolls prophesy the shattering of these high seats, they are swiftly banished into the abyss of shadows and rendered mute. Let us now tally the spiritual bill. What is the terrible tribute exacted by these long centuries of muted tongues and hidden histories? The rift of prosperity between the nations has yawned into a bottomless chasm. A tiny, microscopic fragment of the human lineage now grips the vast treasury of the world's abundance in a stranglehold. Contemplate the scrolls of Oxfam from the year 2026, which unveil that the vaults of the ultra-wealthy expanded by a staggering $2 trillion in the cycle of 2025 alone. In the shadow of this mountain of gold, 3,600,000,000 souls remain ensnared in the quicksand of destitution, while the vital essence of the global south is siphoned away at the horrific velocity of $30 million every passing hour. There is a starvation of the mind, a howling void where memory should reside. Interrogate the wanderer on the street regarding the majesty of African epochs before the tall ships darkened the horizon, and you shall hear only the wind. Yet petition them concerning the lore of Europe, and they will chant a litany of dates, dynasties, blood-soaked wars, and crowned heads without hesitation. This blindness is no roll of the cosmic dice. It is a masterfully sculpted inheritance of shadows. The wreckage upon the psyche has been catastrophic. When you shear a people from their ancient anchorage, when you whisper into their spirits that their genesis begins in shackles and ends in sorrow, you birth a deep spiritual wound that echoes through the blood for 1,000 generations. The tapestry of one's identity and the sanctity of the mental fortress are woven together by an unbreakable thread. In the etheric realms, the desolation is total. How many spirits have consumed a poisoned gospel that renders them orphans and aliens within the very palace of God? How many have peered into the mirror of the holy texts and found no reflection of their own countenance staring back? This is grand larceny of the soul. It is not merely the plundering of yesterday's glories, it is the assassination of tomorrow's potential. You take a lineage explicitly painted in the divine scrolls as sovereigns, warriors, mystics, and masons of civilization, and you bewitch them into accepting a destiny of servitude in the dark. But hearken to this axiom regarding the nature of prophecy. It is an immutable juggernaut. You may erect barriers to stall its arrival. You may stifle its voice for a season, but when the celestial clock strikes the appointed hour, it bursts forth like a deluge breaking the dam. Consequences are mere symptoms, but they are not the ultimate fate. That which was stolen is destined for restoration. Let me articulate with crystalline precision the mechanics of this biblical tectonic shift, for this is no war cry for retribution. This is not the swelling of one ocean to drown the land of another, nor the subjugation of one tribe to exalt the next. The justice of the Almighty elevates the broken without necessitating the annihilation of the oppressor. Turn your gaze to the ancient saga of Joseph, betrayed by kin, shackled, and thrown into the pit of despair. Yet, when the unseen hand raised him to the pinnacle, he became the bread of life for nations, shielding from starvation the very brothers who had bartered his soul for silver. That is the divine blueprint. When the lands of Africa ascend to their rightful throne of economic sovereignty, it births a harmony that stabilizes the entire globe. Mighty, autonomous realms do not cast their sons and daughters into the sea as refugees. Gardens of prosperity offer no fertile ground for the thorns of radicalism to take root. When the harvest is distributed with equity, the bazaars of the world flourish, for the circle of commerce expands and vitality floods back into the global veins. When a people refuse their connection to their divine scriptural essence, they do not bloat with vanity, they ignite with holy mission. They are awakened, they stride fearlessly into destinies they once trembled to even dream of. The transmutation of power whispered by the seers poses no danger to any spirit that truly cherishes righteousness. It strikes terror only into the hearts of structures built upon the sinking sand of inequality. If the serpents have hissed the lie, that the rising of the black diaspora requires the fall of others. You have been ensnared by a deception. The treasury of the Most High knows no famine. There is bounty sufficient for all, there is space limitless, and true justice is a rain that eventually blesses every field in the fullness of time. To those bearing witness who carry the blood of the mother continent or the diaspora, let me prophesy to your spirit in this moment. You are not merely the remnants of the chained. That was but a dark stanza in your song, not your title. It is not the sum of your existence. You are the progeny of monarchs, the bloodline of high priests, the sons of oracles, warmongers for truth, master builders, and those who survived the apocalypse. Your very exhalation is a prophecy. Psalm 68, verse 31, was inscribed for your ascension. Your rousing from slumber is not an insurrection against the cosmic order. It is the cosmic order manifesting in the flesh. With every fragment of truth you ingest, you shatter a link in the chain of illusion. Gnosis is your blade in this twilight hour. Baptize yourself in the deep waters of African scholarship and the theology of the scattered tribes. Excavate the splendor of the kingdom of Kush and the golden horizons of the Mali Empire. Comprehend the gravity of what Timbuktu truly anchored and the beacon of light that radiated from the libraries of Alexandria. Devour the holy texts through a lens scrubbed clean of colonial dust. Perceive that economic self-determination is an act of spiritual worship. Construct your empires, sow your gold into your own kin. Every unit of currency you command is a prophetic vote cast for the dawn of a new age. Cease your waiting for a decree of permission. Halt your quest for validation from the very stony institutions that grow fat on your silence. This is not a matter of ego or vanity. This is the great restoration of all things. Unity is not merely a suggestion, but a divine command etched into your very marrow. For the shattering of your collective soul is the only shadow distinct enough to keep your true strength bound in chains. The man-made constructs of tribal division, the fractures of religious sects, and the mirages of social hierarchy are merely gates barring you from your birthright. Yet, the ancient scroll of unity foretells a harvest of plenty when the Nile civilizations of Ethiopia and Egypt align. The very axis of the world shall tremble and turn. The seeds cast across the oceans by the diaspora must now find their way back to the ancient, fertile soil of the mother continent, before the great restoration can blossom in full glory. For the gaze of the rising generation is locked upon you, watching for the signal fire. They starve for a vision of you that transcends mere survival. They crave to see you flourishing, overflowing with benevolence, wielding sovereignty with grace, and standing with a compassion as formidable as your conviction. Permit me now to address the watchers standing at the edge of this circle. If the blood of the African diaspora does not flow through your veins, yet you find your spirit tethered to this hallowed space, realize this is no random chance. Your arrival here is a destiny marker, a summons from the deep to a higher calling. Cast out all trepidation, for this ascending wave seeks not to drown you, but to elevate the whole of humanity. It is a celestial invitation to join the magnificent tapestry the Creator is revealing, remember. True justice is like the monsoon rain. It brings life to every single field it touches. Your sacred obligation is to adopt the humility of a disciple, to listen with a heart tuned for wisdom, to offer your vitality, and to bravely question the chronicles you were fed. Ask your soul, were you handed a history crafted to inflate your ego, while systematically erasing the glory of another? Are you feasting upon a harvest grown in the soil of disparity? I place this inquiry before you, not to shackle you with the heavy irons of guilt, but to jolt you into the liberating dawn of responsibility. Although your hands did not place the foundation stones of these oppressive citadels, you hold the sovereign volition to help tear them down and erect a sanctuary of holiness in their stead. You stand now at the ultimate fork in the road. You must decide to be a vessel of restoration or a rusted anchor clinging to a dying era, for neutrality is but a phantom when the Spirit of God is sweeping across the deep waters. In this moment, I demand a solemn covenant from your spirit. I need your consciousness fully ignited, and your engagement active. Release your voice into the ether by inscribing a written testimony beneath this transmission right now. Articulate the epiphany that has struck your soul like lightning. Type, "I see the pattern," if the scales have fallen from your vision, or declare, "I am awake," if this message vibrates with the ancient knowing you have carried silently for years. If the gravity of this truth is so massive that you must meditate upon it 5 times over to fully absorb its essence, simply type "Send help" as a token of your surrender to this transformative process. From which meridian of the globe do you receive this frequency? Etch the name of your city, your nation, your territory, that we may behold the sprawling, living map of this awakening assembly. Do not reduce this to mere algorithmic content. This is a kairos moment, a divine appointment in the year 2026. So scatter this vision like seeds in the wind. Do not hoard this illumination within the walls of your own heart. Realize that every share is an act of spiritual insurrection. Every word you carve into the comments section is a thunderous declaration of defiance against the silence that has held you captive. Every signal of resonance you transmit commands the unseen currents of the digital ether to carry this truth to souls starving for sustenance. Stand immovable with me, for the crescendo of this revelation has yet to break the horizon. Here is where I ignite the torch of the path forward, transmuting abstract philosophy into tangible praxis. First, align your trajectory with this assembly by subscribing to this frequency without delay. Do not waver, for entering this order is about positioning your spirit to download a ceaseless flow of prophetic intelligence and divine strategy. Activate the bells of notification, for the timeline of prophecy is quickening with terrifying speed, and you surely do not wish to be the last to decipher the magnificent tapestry the Creator is weaving in real time. Propagate this signal across every digital landscape, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and cast it into the private sanctuaries of your family group chats. The truth carries more mass than your comfort ever will. This is your great commission, and I speak with absolute gravity. This is not designed for your amusement, but for your divine alignment. What you are absorbing is not fleeting entertainment. It is a prophetic impartation, and you are now a consecrated bearer of this flame, carrying the holy burden of responsibility on your shoulders. You have dared to peer behind the heavy velvet curtain to witness what was hidden, and you now grasp the mysteries that were deliberately buried under the dust of ages. You perceive the grand architecture that remains invisible to the sleeping masses, yet this sacred gnosis is not a jewel for your private collection. It is a torch ordained to illuminate the path for everyone within your sphere of influence. Before this week reaches its conclusion, transplant this wisdom into another soul. Engage in deep communion, not to preach from an ivory tower, but to break the bread of understanding and share it at the table of brotherhood. Interrogate them gently on their knowledge of the African presence woven into the Holy Scriptures. Ask if they have felt the tectonic plates of global power grinding beneath their feet, and see if their eyes can discern the cyclical rhymes of history. Rupture the silence and unseal the doors that have been welded shut. Initiate the courageous dialogues that religious institutions have been too paralyzed by cowardice to commence. Channel your resources to fortify the enterprises of the continent and the diaspora. purchase from black-owned entities, and pour capital into African innovation, wielding your economic influence with the precision of a divine instrument. Every coin you release is a ballot cast for the world to come. Every investment is a royal decree of worth, and every dollar circulating within the community is the fulfillment of ancient prophecy in real time. Remember, the prophecy of Ethiopia stretching forth her hands is not merely a spiritual metaphor. It is economic, it is logistical, and it is profoundly physical. It is the manifestation of your free will, making choices that construct a fortress of collective dominion. Dig deeper into this well of knowledge, for this transmission is merely the prologue to the great book. Vast libraries await your arrival, stocked with the masterworks of African scholars, diaspora theologians, and historians who have toiled in the vineyards of truth. Seek them out and devour their wisdom with a ravenous hunger. Immerse yourself in the intellectual legacy of African church fathers like Augustine and Athanasius. Study the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church and its golden chain of faith that has remained unbroken since the days of Solomon. Examine the movements of the Hebrew Israelites with a spirit of sharp discernment, harvesting the gems that harmonize with the holy text, while leaving behind the dross that does not serve the ultimate truth. Metamorphose yourself into a diligent archaeologist of the mysteries, rather than remaining a passive consumer feeding from the trough of information. Send up your prayers like incense for Africa, intercede for the scattered diaspora, plead for a unity that spans the 7 seas, and beseech heaven for favor upon the leaders rising with hearts of pure integrity. Pray for a shield of divine protection to encircle this prophetic movement, and ask for the gifts of wisdom and piercing discernment to navigate the treacherous days ahead. Pray that this great awakening expands without being corrupted by the fragile ego of man or twisted by the wild fires of extremism. Pray that the inheritors of tomorrow receive a legacy of solid identity rather than the dust of confusion. Pray that the inevitable transfer of power aligns seamlessly with the Creator's master blueprint, unfolding in His divine timing and molded by the righteousness of His character. Instruct your children in these ancient ways. Do not permit them to walk in the blindness that once bound our ancestors. Arm them with the scrolls of African history as their primary defense. Guide them through the halls of museums, unveil the cartography of the ancients, and recount the splendors of the kingdom of Kush, the gold of Mansa Musa, and the strategic brilliance of the warrior Queen Nzinga. Open the Holy Bible and trace the fingerprint of the African within its pages. Show them the Ethiopian eunuch who guarded the treasury, Moses who chose an African bride, and Simon of Cyrene who carried the crushing weight of the Saviour's cross. Let them mature with the unshakable conviction that they descend from a lineage of power, majesty, and civilization, not merely a history of tragedy and defeat. Finally, embed yourself deeply in your local community. Seek out the organizations of the diaspora that are weaving good works. Support their mission with your hands and heart, and take a young soul under your wing to mentor them in the ways of eternal truth. Step forth as a master builder of destiny. Offer up your very spirit, pour out your essence like wine, and construct a legacy that defies the erosion of time. Do not merely feast upon the phantom nutrients of digital knowledge, deceiving yourself into believing you have toiled in the sacred vineyard when you have only watched from afar. Let this primordial truth electrify your limbs and launch you deep into the pulsating heart of your physical realm. You must grasp that true prophecy is never a ghostly abstraction floating in the ether. It is a thundering war cry against the suffocating silence of stagnation. It is the raw grit of the earth crunching beneath your boots, the rich soil staining your hands with labor, the pouring out of your soul's treasure, and the burning of your numbered days upon the high altar of duty. To those who feel the sacred vibration summoning them to serve, Do not linger at the gate, cross the threshold this very instant. Cease your endless waiting for an earthly decree, for an ordination from hollow gatekeepers who possess no spiritual eyes to perceive the celestial fire raging within your soul. Do not wither or retreat into the shadows simply because your spirit's shape does not fit their brittle, ancient clay molds. The heralds that the Most High is awakening in this twilight hour are not all clutching parchments from the ivy-covered halls of academia. Many are rising like holy smoke from the cracked concrete of the city streets, emerging from the chaotic din of the marketplace, and ascending from the deep, dark valleys of agony and raw, unfiltered survival. If the Creator has pressed a burning coal of revelation upon your tongue, you must release the sound. If He has unfurled a divine blueprint before your inner eyes, you must construct it. If the heavy mantle of leadership has descended upon your shoulders, you must march forward without fear. Traverse this path with a head bowed in reverence, but a heart roaring like a lion, wielding absolute humility, coupled with a terrifying, holy boldness. If you hold a scepter of influence in your grip, wield it not for pride, but as a weapon for righteousness. If you are a scribe or a teacher, pull back the veil on unadulterated history. If you shepherd a flock, deliver the messages that shatter the foundations of the lie. If you command the flows of commerce, fling open your doors with the deliberate intent to uplift the downtrodden. If you are a guardian of the young, rear them with eyes wide open to the harsh and beautiful reality. If you are a soul woven with creativity, let your art become a polished mirror, reflecting the perfection of the divine order. If you stand within the marble halls of governance, battle fiercely as a warrior for laws that repair the broken walls of generations long past. Whatever stage you occupy, sanctify it for this high purpose. This epoch is a fleeting mist. The portals of prophetic destiny do not remain open indefinitely, and we are standing in the very epicenter of one such gateway on this day. The seeds you plant in this specific, volatile season will expand into vast forests that will either shelter or cast a dark shadow over the generation yet to be born. Your bloodline will look back across the river of time and either bless your name for your vigilance and vigor, or they will weep in confusion, asking why you stood silent and frozen while the world turned on its axis. The great fork in the road is here before you. Cut your covenant this very day. Will you be a living, breathing vessel in this divine current, or will you remain a spectator, watching from the dust and ash of the sidelines? Before we bow our heads to commune with the divine presence, let me illuminate one crucial point with absolute, crystal clarity. This great awakening is not a summons for one tribe to place its heavy heel upon the neck of another. That is the archaic way, the broken human rhythm, the crumbling architecture of fallen empires that have turned to dust. Rather, this is the sovereign hand, restoring cosmic equilibrium, righting the ancient scales of justice, and aligning every soul according to the master blueprint drawn at the very foundation of the world. When the lands of Africa ascend, when her scattered children walk in their full royal authority, and when ancient scriptural identity is recovered from the ashes, it steals no light from another's candle. Instead, it lifts the spiritual frequency of the entire earth. For when righteousness flows like a river, the whole of creation breathes a purer, sweeter air. We are all offspring of the Most High, every nation, every lineage, every language spoken under the vault of heaven. No spirit is born superior, and no soul is crafted inferior in the eyes of the Maker. We all bear the sacred image, each with a distinct note to play in the grand divine symphony. Yet, for eons, the mechanisms of the world have been corrupted, bounty has been stolen, and dominion has been hoarded by the greedy few. Veracity was buried in the dark earth. But now the Almighty speaks with the voice of thunder. It is finished. I am setting the weights and measures right once more. I am elevating those who were cast down into the dust. I am bringing low the towering mountains of arrogance. I am fulfilling the ancient promises I whispered at the dawn of time. If your heart truly beats for righteousness, you will rejoice in this great shaking, even when it disturbs your comfort. Abba, Father, we approach your throne with spirits full of thanksgiving and minds unlocked to your sovereign will. We bless you for the lifting of the heavy veil. We honor you because the words that leave your mouth never return to you empty, void, or powerless. We are in awe that the visions inscribed on scrolls 3,000 years ago are breathing, moving, and unfolding before our very gaze in this hour. We praise you, the El Roi who sees all, the one who hears our cries, who remembers his covenant, and who moves with irresistible power. We give thanks for the lineage of survivors who endured the unimaginable so that we might draw breath today. We honor the unbreakable faith they clutched to their chests like a shield, even when their dignity, their land, and their names were stripped away by the oppressor. We rejoice that the tearful prayers they sowed in darkness are being harvested in the light of our lifetime. We stand atop their giant shoulders, honoring their blood and sacrifice by walking boldly into the liberty they could only dream of seeing. Sovereign Lord, endow us with divine wisdom from on high. Grant us the clarity to decode the signs of these turbulent and shifting times. Sharpen our discernment to see your fingerprints upon the shifting of nations. Instruct us to read your holy text with eyes washed clean of the muddy cultural filters we inherited from fallible men. Illuminate the totality of your message, specifically those sacred passages that were hidden, quieted, or cast aside by the editors of history. We hunger for truth, even when it tastes bitter to the tongue. We crave your vantage point, even when it shatters our own. Bring your healing hand upon us, Father. Mend the ancient wounds that still bleed in the present moment. Soothe the generational trauma that has woven itself into our DNA and anchored itself deep in our spirits. Restore the minds fractured by centuries of deceit and erasure. Repair the spiritual ruins caused by doctrines that led us far astray from your heart. Where righteous indignation burns against injustice, transmute that fire into fuel for holy action, lest it consume us as hatred and ash. Where the root of bitterness seeks to grow, uproot it and plant a profound trust that you are the great reconciler of all things. Where shame has cast a long shadow, let the light of true identity and holy dignity shine forth. We choose to forgive, Lord. We release those who distorted your truth to forge chains for others. We release the debt of those who built wealth on the backs of suffering. We absolve those who kept their lips sealed when their voices were desperately needed to save the innocent. We extend grace solely because you first extended it to us. We let go of the gall of resentment, knowing that to hold it is to dam the river of our own blessing. We select liberty over the cage of resentment, yet we also demand justice over a fragile, counterfeit peace. We elect hard truth over soothing, sweet fabrications. Place a hedge of fire and protection around this great awakening. Father, cover the seekers of wisdom and the prophetic heralds now ascending. Shield them from every arrow flown by day or terror by night. Defend their hearts against the heavy cloak of discouragement. Encircle them with a fortress of kinship and unwavering support. Do not allow this sacred momentum to be stolen by human pride or twisted into extremism. Keep the waters clear. Keep the roots deep in the soil of your eternal word. May our spiritual vision remain irrevocably locked upon the timeless splendor of your kingdom and the crushing, magnificent weight of your glory. We cry out to you for a sacred convergence of our spirits. Lord, you know intimately that the abyss of division has long been the fissure in our armor, the very fragility in our bedrock. You perceive with crystalline clarity how the enemy has weaponized our nuances, twisting our beautiful diversity into fragmentation, leaving us powerless and scattered. Yet, the ancient scroll of your covenant heralds a thunderous reunion, a holy regathering of the flock that was driven to the winds. Prophecies of old speak of Ethiopia and Egypt rising in unified strength, standing shoulder to shoulder, and of worshippers emerging from beyond the mighty rivers of Cush. Therefore, we stand in the gap, praying for a bond that defies oceans, welding the motherland to her scattered children in a grand symphony of divine cooperation. Let the wisdom of the Caribbean Isles flow freely into the vast expanse of the Americas, drawing sustenance from the deep reservoirs of our shared resilience. Though our beginnings were painted against different skylines, our ultimate destiny rushes toward a singular, blazing horizon of purpose. We carry a legion of stories in our blood, yet we kneel before the one High King. Stitch our hearts into a seamless tapestry of brotherhood. Father, bestow upon us the sight to view one another, not as competitors in a worldly game, but as bloodkin in a holy lineage. Our prayer ascends like incense for the entirety of the human race, O divine architect. For every nation standing tall, every tribe gathering near, and every tongue confessing, we hoist them high before your throne. We intercede for the spirits of those who have feasted on fruit grown in the soil of inequity, praying that the piercing light of truth shatters their ignorance. May they pivot from their resistance and clasp hands with the sacred mandate of healing and reparation. We plead for minds darkened by the lies of their fathers, that the scales of deceit might fall away, revealing the sharp edge of clarity. We besiege heaven for the earthly seats of power, that they might choose the righteous highway of justice, even if it costs them their comfort and their privilege. Understand this truth. This great awakening is not a zero-sum conquest where the rise of one demands the destruction of another. Instead, it is the unfolding of your heavenly balance, a rising tide that eventually washes blessing upon every coastline. We declare your primordial vows, Father. We breathe the destiny of Psalm 68, verse 31, into the very marrow of our existence. Look, princes and nobility stride forth from the Egyptian sands. Ethiopia is running to stretch her hands in reverence to the Most High. We decree that this ancient foresight is blooming in our very midst right now. We command a supernatural quickening over this era, a divine haste to destiny. We declare that the emerging generation shall walk with heads high, fully draped in their authentic self, and wielding the sword of spiritual dominion. We proclaim that every jewel stolen shall be restored to its rightful vault. That which was hidden in the dark shall be dragged into the brilliant light, and all that history has broken shall be reconstructed by grace. Endow us with the courage to walk the razor's edge of truth without lifting a fist in rage. Fill us with the strength to rule in power without the rotting decay of arrogance. Gift us the heavenly insight to chase after justice without tasting the bitter poison of revenge. May our memory be etched in stone by our deep charity, our ironclad integrity, and our fierce loyalty to your laws. In this critical hour of shifting tides and transferred mantles, let every tower we build and every cornerstone we set bring glory to your name and goodwill to all mankind. Let our very breath be a testament that prophecy is alive and that you are the covenant keeper who knows no failure. We pledge to be active masons of your word, not merely silent observers. We swear to plunge into the depths of knowledge, to scatter wisdom like seed, to engineer the future, to invest our resources, to guide the youth, to lead with a bowed head, and to serve with a joyful heart. We consecrate every podium and stage given to us as a holy desk for truth and right standing. We make a solemn pact to raise the next generation with eyes unclouded, fully awake and liberated in their spirits. We promise to toil together across every chasm, for your kingdom rests on the bedrock of oneness. Cover us, O Lord, as we walk this path, for the enemy screams against this glorious dawn. We are aware that the gales of opposition will howl, the fiery darts will rain down, and the mist of despair will try to blind us. Yet, you are infinitely more majestic than them all. You dwell in our hearts, you charge before us as the great captain, you fight our battles. We anchor our absolute trust in you, Father, and in the flawless precision of your timing. We rest our weight on your master plan. We trust that you are the perfecter of the faith you began, in the mighty name of Jesus, who came down for every tribe, bled for every soul, and is coming back for all who clutch the faith. We lay these requests at the foot of the throne. We seal this revelation with the sweet smoke of our prayers. We advance to ignite our holy mission in this prophetic window. We shout our resounding yes to the waves of your Spirit. We say yes to the raw, unfiltered truth. We say yes to the balance of justice. We say yes to walking in the overflow of power, identity, and divine intent. Amen. And let it be established. To build a citadel of fellowship around this spiritual rebirth, let us now take solid, actionable strides together. Gather in local assemblies and wisdom circles to mine the deep veins of African history and its intricate, unbreakable links to the scriptural saga. Begin these holy meetings by reading aloud together from texts like Psalm 68, verse 31, or Zephaniah chapter 3, verse 10. Build digital town squares and webs for sharing bloodline breakthroughs and DNA truths, thereby stitching back together the torn threads between the diaspora and the continent. Unite in economic ventures, backing new businesses within the African continental free trade area, or pouring gold into community projects that align with the African Union's Agenda 2063 for sovereign self-reliance. Commit your whole heart to initiatives of cross-cultural exchange meant to bridge the miles, such as virtual councils where African Americans and Africans share their common roots and unique paths. Partner with or spark Pan-African assemblies, such as making a pilgrimage to the upcoming African Union summits or digital gatherings in the year 2026 to turn up the volume on unity and strengthen the global talk on reparations, including United Nations initiatives in 2026, focused on healing the wounds of colonial pasts. We must also weave in the holy responsibility of guarding the earth, fighting for the righteous and lasting management of Africa's rare minerals in the green energy shift, connecting this respect for the soil to the biblical command to care for creation. Let us shine a light on and revere the critical part women play in this grand awakening. Drink from the courage of matriarchal giants like the Queen of Sheba or Queen Zinga to light the fires of leadership. Use modern tools like AI-powered ancestry apps to dig further into the mystery of who you are. These actions do far more than build a neighborhood. They give flesh and bone to the prophetic gathering, transforming lonely awakenings into a unified, unstoppable wave for justice and complete healing. Now, listen to this with your soul. Walk in the brilliance of truth. Walk in the calm of peace. Walk in the roar of power. You are not the sketch they drew. You are the masterpiece God spoke into existence. You are nobility in skin. You are a carrier of prophecy. You are saturated with power. You are hand-picked. You are loved beyond measure. You are free without condition. The steel shackles have snapped. The old deceptions lie naked in the dirt. The prophecy is coming alive right in front of us. And you have the honor of playing a role in this epic. Do not dare to fall back asleep. Do not let this day be forgotten in the mist. Do not let this holy flame die out. You have been shaken awake for a moment exactly like this one. Eons before you ever drew your very first breath of air, the sacred spirits of your lineage were already weaving chants of hope through the corridors of history to summon this precise alignment of fate. The multitudes of the unborn gaze through the shimmering veils of tomorrow, holding their breath to see if you will finally awaken to your high calling, all while the great weaver of the cosmos remains your unshakable shield and eternal foundation. So, I say to you, rise up from the valley of obscurity and cloak yourself in the radiant mantle that was stitched for your spirit before the foundations of the world were laid. Lay your hand upon the inheritance that has awaited your arrival since the dawn of time, and stand in awe as the Infinite One channels wonder and power through the vessel of your life. The moment the celestial reality of your being illuminates the inner chambers of your heart, the shackles of illusion dissolve into dust, leaving you utterly unbound. March forth into the light with the sovereign power of a liberated soul, and let the very ground quake in reverence beneath the weight of your glorious purpose.